Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to show you how you can use vMix and Neural Net's LiveToAir to create an interactive debate format panel show. So there's a lot of different things we'll be covering in this. So clearly, this is going to be pretty broad with scripting as well as lots of vMix specific functions, XML, and a look at some of the features inside of LiveToAir. But before we get started with that, I like to invite everybody, please, if you have any comments, questions, as always, just post them and we'll try to get to them live on air. Also, if you would like to join us, we will be taking callers as well. We have the link for that. We will, if you call now, this is probably something we'll pick up sort of mid-show because we try to get through the introduction first, but we'd love to have you join us if you could. Okay, so to start, what I'd like to do is let me show you what this would look like as a production, sort of this whole interactive debate format. So what I have set up here is a show which has 3 remote panelists that will come in. Let me get this. What we would be able to do then is make some type of assertion that this panel would have an opinion on. We then turn around and we give them a chance to vote how they feel, either agree or disagree. So I'm going to reach over and click something over here. When they click, and all 3 panelists have an answer, that voting goes away, and then I could go to the next step where I see who agreed and who disagreed. At that point, once we have that sort of, here's how everybody voted, we go into a next step where this could be something, you'd have a host here, they could be talking with the panelists, everybody could go and sort of navigate through what they're doing. You can let everybody during this time, after they've made their points, almost vote again. So you could turn around and say, has anybody changed their mind? And then you could look at the vote again and you could see, okay, somebody that originally agreed, disagreed, talk a little more, and then just go as a next step to start over and go to the next assertion that you want to have the debate about. So that's the basic flow of all of this, and there are a lot of moving pieces in this. So we'll start with going into LiveToAir, but before we do that, I just want to recognize that we have some of the comments here. We'll get to those in a bit. We had some technical things going on the business side that we need to take care of, so I'll have somebody managing the comments shortly, but just wanted to let everybody know I see you, and we'll get to that very shortly. So probably the first place to start is looking at the LiveToAir piece, because that's the piece that sort of the end guest, these 3 people you see here, would be interacting with. So if we look at what the guest sees, this is the guest UI. So let me jump in there. So I apologize for turning away, but the system's off to the side of me here. So this is the standard LiveToAir guest interface. And one of the things you'll notice is that across the bottom here, we have these interactive elements. So you can have somebody who can raise their hand, somebody who can agree, somebody who can disagree. If I were to, let me just switch this over to an agree here. And if you actually now look at the LiveToAir interface itself, when that guest who's connected agrees or disagrees, it shows up on our LiveToAir screen that the LiveToAir operator would be seeing. So let's see if we can switch over to that. And you'll see now we have these 3 guests here, and in the upper band of their thumbnail for each one of these guests, it says what their state is. So if we look here, if I just switch, I can go from agrees to disagrees to a hand raise. So all that information is carried into the LiveToAir UI. But what would make this interesting for scripting is that the information that we have in the LiveToAir interface is actually written out as XML as well. So I am just going to sort of apologize if this is a little rough here, but so this is the XML that LiveToAir is writing out. And there's a lot here, so I'm not trying to cover all of this. This isn't a LiveToAir tutorial. But what you have here is you have, for each one of the guests that are assigned to a channel in LiveToAir, we have whole sets of name, all types of details about their state, their, what their, the different conditions of the audio and video. But what you see right here is we have something called interaction state, and that's what we're getting with the agree, disagree, or hand raise. And in addition to just knowing what this state is, we also know the timestamp for it. So it gives a date and timestamp when that was received by LiveToAir. So this means in addition to just using the XML to know the state, you could do things where you could have time things. So you could do, if I wanted to, the first person to answer, or the third person, you could actually calculate all that. All that information is sitting here. So that's just definitely something we think is a value add beyond capturing the XML state itself. So that's where we are with sort of the LiveToAir flow. The guest has those options on the bottom, and inside of LiveToAir, you see it, and in the XML that LiveToAir writes out, you can read that, which makes this all accessible to scripting. And that's something that we love here. So this is part of what drove how this design was made. So as the next step, and again, I apologize. I know we usually get to the comments right away, but we have some stuff going on that we're trying to take care of in the background. So Matt, who normally handles all the comments, hopefully will be with us shortly on the show and can sort of push through that so we can get back to everybody and make this a little more interactive with the engagement. So with that sort of as a backdrop for how the interactivity is happening with these remote guests, let's jump into the vMix preset that we have for this. And there's quite a number of things that we can go through in this. So as you saw, we have sort of one camera that's sitting over here that we're using as our input camera into our sort of debate show. Then we have the 3 remote guests that are coming in. We start with the initial introduction of the panel, which is basically a colored background with the text overlay and layers with each of the guests sized, cropped, and positioned on this panel. We then, so if we sort of look at this, let me move sort of to the initialized position so you can see. So then if I go to the next step, you can see that we're actually doing a merge between these 2 inputs. And in doing that merge, the guests all slide down because we just reposition them. And we present the assertion that we're going to be debating on top of that. So that's basically what's happening here. And once everybody votes, I mean, we have a voting process which we'll go into in the scripting, but once everybody does cast their vote, we then are going to this here, this input here, which again, with the merge, the way this works now that we merged it, you get to sort of see dynamically the people who are agreeing and disagreeing. And again, this is just, we are using these same core elements with a different backdrop and moving around this assertion to raise it a little higher. But so that's how we're doing. And again, this is just a a set of layers with a backdrop that we have set up. And, again, it's the same thing. Again, we move forward and we go to the next phase, which has all of the guests. What we're doing here that's a little bit more interesting, in addition to doing the merge to move everybody around in this, is that we are going through the state of how everybody voted. And in the title, sort of this title that's sitting right over here, we are changing the background color and the text based on how they voted. So in addition to just having the layers and moving them around, we are now using the data that we collected from the voting to basically position, to color the background for everybody. And just to sort of jump back to what we did in the previous step, we were using scripting to sort of say, do people go in a layer at the top in the agree column or a layer at the bottom in the disagree column? So again, that's all being done through scripting as we step through this. And then everything else we have here, these are just titles, which we're taking the sort of assertion, the iPhone is worth the premium price versus competitors, that sort of thing. So you get that coming in through titles. So a few things that I want to focus on before we dig into any of the specific scripting. The first is the workflow that we have packaged in here. Every time we place, so let me sort of start this at the beginning so you can see. So whenever I place somebody into program, what I'm doing is I'm using a trigger to load into preview what the next input is going to be. So this is sort of helping me with the workflow. So if I come in here, you can see that under triggers, I can say on, transition in, I'm loading what I want to have into the preview, and I'm saying what is the, basically, what assertion, what question do I want to post? So that's basically what we're doing when we load this in. And then every one of the inputs that we have following that, we're doing something a little different. So let me get out of here and go to, so now when I load the next one in, so let's sort of do the next step here. When I load the next one in, you'll see that for them, we're just turning around and saying, let's load the vote tally over in the next input. So we're doing that as a way to construct the workflow that we want for this production. And that means that when I want to move through the production, all I'm basically doing is doing individual merges through each of these inputs because they're loading the next input into preview for me. And that can simplify things a lot. So when you think of ways when you're constructing your own workflows, if there are things that have to happen in a sequence, that can make your life much easier to leverage triggers in that way. So let me sort of jump to the next thing because I want to talk a little bit about how we did some of the different elements in here for the shortcuts as well. So let me go over here to settings and shortcuts. So we have a number of shortcuts that we've put together here to get this to work. One of them, which is sort of this block of shortcuts here in the middle that we have. These are all letting me pick a question more directly. So if you sort of look up here, if I wanted to just jump to a different question, I could turn around, if you look up here, and just say, I just want to start there and then sort of move forward from a different question. There may be any number of reasons, so we just set that up. So all these are doing is a data source select row. So we have in our data source manager, we've set up an input with all these questions. I'll jump into that in a moment. And this is basically just saying, how do I want to go through and select rows? In data sources, they are 0 index. So the first data source is row 0 on up. So that's how you can think of this. And so that's all we're doing here. We're going through and using this as a way to jump through questions. When we start a debate, though, or what we need to do is we have to have something that initializes everything. And we did this as a small start script dynamic, but it's doing very basic stuff. It's basically starting with our initial screen, sleeps a bit to let that settle, and then it's initializing to the first row in the questions. Then it sets the preview up and turns off some of the overlays that we use for like when people start to vote. If you remember in the beginning, we had that voting segment. That was something that you were able to see. We would pull that off the screen. So when we're initializing, we're sort of getting everything back. But it's a very straightforward set of initializations to get everything to a beginning position. And we do that through a script dynamic because we could just paste it into one section and manage it right from here. For next, which is the steps I was taking, like I said, it doesn't get much simpler. I'm doing a merge. I'm taking whatever's in preview and I'm merging it. And that's how we did those next between each one of the different segments. The way the voting works is all through scripting. And we have something which is to end the vote. So say in the middle, we wanted to go back and do something else. We could jump out of the vote, stop the scripts. And all this does is really, it just goes in and ends the scripts for everything we want and make sure if I had that voting now overlay up that it pulled that off the screen. So very, very basic stuff here. For that, the all interesting parts here really revolve around the script. And that's what we'll jump into next here. So what I think I'm going to do, because Matt's really been delayed, we won't be able to show them on screen, but I just want to talk to the comments here. So we have Bill Mew. Bill, thank you for joining us. He's checking if anybody's here. So yes, we are here, but thank you. And Udaman is saying he's not familiar with LiveToAir, but he should be able to comprehend. Yeah, that's why I tried to bracket that segment off you, so it was just all in the beginning, so you understood sort of how this was coming in. But everything else is going to be all vMix centric here. We have the Jesus Full Gospel Assembly coming from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for joining us. Definitely appreciate it. So let's see. Bill Mew, again, wondering where we are and then saying hello. So Bill, thank you. JP Nordet, JP, thank you for joining us. I definitely appreciate it. Automation for vMix. Oh, great to have you here, Automation. Thank you. And then Bill is making a comment where he says that he knows I'm keen to promote LiveToAir, which is great, but if on a budget, new vMix Zoom integration is of real interest. Could you run both a panel and green room on different audio buses with vMix Zoom? So my understanding, though I haven't had a chance to play with it here, my understanding is that it will work very similarly to the way that things work in vMix Call, where you can pick a return video and you can pick a unique audio bus. My understanding, though, in terms of how everything works across different guests in Zoom, is that they work in aggregate. And I could be wrong because I haven't played with this, but this is my understanding of how the Zoom meeting API works, is that you can send a video and an audio return to them. It creates the on mix minus. So if you wanted to create something in a green room, you could do that, but all of the guests in that Zoom session, based on my knowledge of how this API works technically, they would all be sort of in the green room or out of the green room. Unlike today's, in a vMix call scenario where you could say, I can put some people in a green room because they're my next panel and I have other people live or taking people on one at a time. I don't believe that it would work that way. You have individual video and audio outs, so you could sort of work around this, but you couldn't have sort of a separate video feed or a separate audio feed back to guests in the green room versus what would be going back to guests that would be sort of live. So you could certainly make things work and you could still create a green room, but it wouldn't look like a green room for these guests. There'd be no sort of signaling to say, oh, I have a different video return. And again, this is as far as I know based on my knowledge of the API provided by Zoom. So that's just a reference point. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with multiple, front ends. The other piece to this, though, is, in terms of interactivity, I believe you can get notification of some of these things, but how that would work, I'm not sure yet. I'm not that deeply connected with the Zoom API at this point. So I couldn't tell you necessarily whether you could do things like, I know this person raised their hand and it's like written somewhere. It may be something where you'd have to sort of poll through each person. I don't know if there's a call back or something. When somebody raises a hand, it calls something. So I don't really know to address that piece of it. But there's definitely something that you can do for sort of the general context of creating this type of production. All right, so apologies that we couldn't do this in a more normal way, but just wanted to make sure that everybody knows I'm here and I'm seeing you. And I wanted to have the conversation. The conversation is what makes the show work for me. So hopefully you find it useful as well. So let me start now getting back in and let's look at our script that we have set up to handle all of this. So in our usual way, in the beginning, we set up everything that we're going to do. And the way we're working this is we're just turning around and saying, we're trying to capture what the state is of each one of the guest channels that will be involved in this production. So, we have, some number of guest slots and, this is not fully, fully production ready code, but it's all, fully operational. So, we come back and say, we're going to use 3 guest slots. The response count is how many of those guest slots have responded. So we sort of keep count of that, because what we're going to then need to do to know that everybody voted, say, we've had this many guests have responded, and these are the total number of guests. So that's how we know everybody's voted, and we leverage that. And then we just sort of store which channel voted which way as we go through this. And that's really a lot of the things you have up front. We have some additional slots for more information we can pull out of LiveToAir, name, location, things like that. We didn't bake that into this, but that's just stuff we wanted to have there. And then we have sort of, where do we pull all this information from LiveToAir? We pull it into a node list. It's just XML, so we create a node list for this. And we're saying, what's the first input of LiveToAir in our vMix session? And that's input 2. So we use that to sort of base our interactions with these guests and how we move them around on the screen. Because you notice all the LiveToAir guests are moving in different locations on the screen. And we use that way. So up front, we initialize everything to 0. Nobody's voted. Nobody's here. Nobody's agreed. Nobody's disagreed. And we do all that stuff out. I specifically now, when I'm ready to vote, because this script runs when we are ready to vote, I turn on that voting now overlay that you saw. And so that's the next sort of thing. Now, everybody in the audience knows that these guests are voting. And when they're all done, you know that you can start to go through and see how everybody voted and get the discussion started. So what do we do next with this? Well, what we do is we wait for everybody to vote, and we have to figure out how to capture that. So we're starting out by doing a while true, which is just essentially an infinite loop that something internal to that loop has to break out of. It's not bounded by the loop itself. There's something that says, okay, exit the while, and we're good. So what I'm doing is I'm reading the XML file. So these first 3 lines are all about saying, let me set up to grab and open this XML file. Where is the file located? Define the XML document I'm reading into, and then as a file stream, read this into the file stream, and then I can start using everything from here to load this into the XML document. And that's what I'm doing. This opens the file, generates the file stream, and this loads that file stream that I just read into an XML document. And so this gives us basically all of that information that we saw from the vMix XML. This is now in the system and things I can use. So with that done, this is basically the same sort of stuff that you're doing, except vMix has a more direct way to get that, but I'm just creating a node list with all the vMix settings. So very similar to things we've done already. So we go through, look at this, and what I'm asking for now is give me all the information on the guest. So that's this thing where I select nodes. And if you look, I'll just sort of jump over here. You can see this segment here is LTA and then the guest. So this is going through and saying, I want all the XML nodes that are part of LTA/guest in the tree. And that's how I'm pulling them in. So this is basically all the information about each of the guests. And, just some error checking here to make sure I did read something. And now I'm going to go and say, let's see if all the panels have responded by now. Because this is, it's every time I loop through, I have to check. Did everybody respond? So I set my response count to 0, which means I'm going to say at this point, nobody's responded. And then I'm just going to go through each one of these guest channels, read the interaction state here, which is what we're doing in this line, and pull that in. And that will be agrees, disagrees. And then if this guest, this specific channel we're looping through, has agreed, up the response count by 1. If they disagreed, up the response count by 1. So this means the channel I'm on now has cast a vote. And that's basically what we're getting here. I then can turn around and say, if they have cast a vote, I'm just going to save what that vote is for this channel. So I know in the future, so I can say channel 1 agreed, channel 3 disagreed. Excuse me. So that's basically what I'm doing. And I do that for all of the active channels, the number of guest channels that we have. And so we do this as one pass through each of the channels. And then I turn around and say, if the response count is greater than or equal to the number of guest slots. So if every one of the guests has responded, either agreed or disagreed, I just break out of the while loop. Otherwise, I just sleep for half a second and do it again. And so that as a process, if you think about it now, guests in the background are going to be, clicking agree or disagree at all different times. It's only when everybody has clicked something that will break out. Otherwise, I just keep looping and doing that same process. I check all 3 of them. Do I have a count of 3? Then I work and I continue on. So that's what this block of code is doing. And these are things that we've covered on the XML side, and from a logical point of view, I think you can understand, how that would work for making sure the whole panel is ready. Once we've done that, then I can come back and say, now I have all the votes, and I've captured them, because in there I'm saying I read what each channel has voted. So now I just actually start processing all of this. And what I'm going to do, if you remember the way we have the vMix preset organized, is that it is a sequential set of inputs that we step through. So in this code, I'm going to prepare all of those inputs ahead of time, because I'm just going through them in order. So in this one sort of loop through the channels, I'm going to set what needs to be set in each one of those inputs. So we're going to start in the beginning and say, let's, for each one of the channels, now that I know they have it, let's pull the interaction state. And then based on what that state is, if they agreed or if they disagreed, I am going to take, basically calculate sort of which channels. So in my, who are all the slots that agreed? And I just say, this is I take that LiveToAir channel and say, you're in the agree slot. And so this is really working with two indices now to keep this in mind. So my agree index sort of starts at 0. So I have 0, 1, 2, I could go as many as we have slots. And so for each one of these agree slots, I'm going saying, if this gets agreed, put them in the agree slot. I may have nobody in the agree slot and everybody in disagree slot. So the agree index will never increment. There's nobody agrees. But it does the same thing with disagrees. But I will be able to come back and say, now I know I have 2 people that agreed, and they're LiveToAir slots, 1 and 3, and I have 1 person who disagreed that's LiveToAir slot 2. And that's all we're doing here. We're going through and setting all of this up to know who's done which. And with all of the inputs set up, then we're going to go through and start to manipulate all of the inputs. So for the first thing we're going to do is we have a set of layers on the vote input. And for the votes, if you remember, across the top, we have everybody who agreed, and across the bottom, we have everybody who disagreed. And so what I'm doing here is for each of these, I initialize all of the agree layers and set them all to none. So we start out by saying, I want to make sure that every layer in there is blank. And there's a interesting point, because it was something I didn't remember how to do. If you want to take and set a layer to none inside of vMix in a script, what you need to do is you need to set the layer, comma, and then blank. Leave nothing. You're not putting an input number there. You're not putting the word none there. It's just blank. When you do that, it sets that layer to none. So something to note in terms of how all of that would work. So we go and start by initializing everything. And now we're jumping in and going through, and we'll fill in everything in all the downstream slots. So we start by saying, if this first guest, the guest slot 1, has agreed, that's their LiveToAir response, they agreed, then I'm going to go and move them to the agreed layer inside of that voting. So they move to the top layer. We have 2, 3, and 4 are the 3 layers. So if you sort of notice here, I say the agree layers here are layers 2 to 4, and the disagree layers are layers 5 to 7. So that's how we're moving stuff. So for each one of these things, I'm saying I'm moving, if you're LiveToAir 1 and you agreed as the first channel of LiveToAir 1, you move to the first agree slot. If you're second channel of LiveToAir, you move to the second. So that's why you see the people move it up and move down. That was all done through that. We also then set the response text on the discussion vote. So that's the one where we sort of moved everybody over to the side, and they're all sitting there with a camera on, so you could have a host talking with these guests. So we set the text along the sides for these guests to do you agree or you disagree? And that's what displays along the side. And then we change the background color. So we have like a little box behind the agree and then a box behind the guest. And that's what you have going on here. We're just changing these background colors. So let me actually I'm going to sort of switch over to the LiveToAir, to the vMix output for a second so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So over here, this red box here and this red box here, you can see the sort of thin black lines along here. Those are the things that I'm setting the colors to. So I'm going into the title that I have, which is this title. Let me, cut to this as well. So that's this title over here. And I'm going in there and I'm changing these boxes. I'm doing the box colors and I'm changing the text that I have in there. So that's basically what we have going on to create this. So if we jump back to the script here, that is exactly what we did for the setting the colors and the text in this loop. So this is going through each one of the LiveToAir channels, and if they agree, we're going through setting the text to agree and setting the background colors to green for the box and the banner. And if it's disagree, all the same things, we move them down to the lower level in their corresponding slot, and we set the backgrounds to red and the text to disagree. So that basically has all of those elements done. And at that point, we turn off the voting display. So now we know everybody's voted. We have all the stuff set up downstream. So we didn't just do the next label. We did all the inputs that we need. And we turn that off, and I can continue on. So that's the key for how all of this sort of worked on that vote. And that happens in one specific spot where I go in and press the voting now shortcut. And when everybody votes, all of this happens. So that's how all of that works. So that's everything that I wanted to cover directly with this. But let's see, I think we have, okay. Oh, so I am told Matt is back. So we got Mark Harrison. Mark, thank you for joining us here. I appreciate that. Thank you for being a part of this, because that's what matters to us. So, and Matt, thank you. Great to have you on the crew again. So basically, this was not specifically about LiveToAir in the overall goal. What we wanted to show is a couple of things. First is that you can use sort of a workflow, bake a workflow into a preset, a vMix preset, using triggers, where you make sure that everything is loaded. The second is that you can, if you think about the types of panels that you do, because a lot of people who do meetings in general have that sort of stark panel where it's just, I'm going to, almost like everybody has a virtual mic, and you sit there and go, okay, everybody introduce yourself. And then you go through the, okay, I ask a question, everybody sort of individually answers the question, but it doesn't have a lot of back and forth engagement. This is really about thinking through different ways. So maybe at different points in a traditional panel discussion, you can turn around and make assertions that you think will, be topical, but controversial. People could have different perspectives on it, and what would work best, and sort of generate some more of that discussion. Have these things split to, these are agrees and disagrees, and get those points back and forth. So as opposed to waiting for somebody in a panel to have that, I don't agree with you, Bob, or I don't agree with you, Jane. Now it becomes something where you see this here, and you as a host, as a moderator, or having whatever host or moderator you have, you can get that type of discussion now to happen. So just another thought for ways to create more panel-based engagement, because we think that could be really interesting. And then the third is just, dealing with a lot of different things. You're combining scripting, you're combining data sources, you're combining shortcuts into titles. So all these things can play together. And so this is a show I really wanted to do that sort of drew a lot of these elements with interactivity, engagement, and manipulation, as well as scripting all together. So that's everything that I had for today's show. I'm sorry we got started a little late and things have been a little chaotic, but some days are just like that. So why don't we call it a wrap for the show? And if you can hang around for a few minutes, we can all just talk together in the post-show about anything we covered here, any other topics, video production related you'd like. So if you can, that's great. If not, I'll see you next week. Be safe, be well. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining and hanging out for the post show here. So one of the things that I wanted to just sort of touch on is what made me think of this. I've been working with a friend of mine and sort of a member of this sort of Streaming Alchemy community, Jeff Fitzgerald, who has been talking a lot about building a show that has more civil engagement, the way that people could talk about subjects and topics that, are not normally, sort of just discussed, but do it in a way that's respectful and, and thoughtful, so he's been working on different ways to do that for quite a while. And in talking with him, I just thought that this could be an interesting format to apply the way we did here. And this is a very simple example, but the sort of arc of the flow for each one of these assertions in the production that I think is interesting is that you get people's initial opinions and you get to see that. Then you have a motivated discussion by a host that gets people to sort of argue why they have a specific opinion. And then if you noticed, I wanted to insert in there the ability for people to come back and say, I actually changed my mind after listening. And if people don't change their minds, that's not the point. The point is that you want to give people sort of that open opportunity to say, in listening to another position, another perspective on an issue, I was persuaded to, change my mind. And, we just did this like agree, disagree, but there can be other things where you can turn around and say, now I'm unsure. You could have some sort of, gradation of where do I sit with this. So there are other ways of capturing interactivity like this. But that was the general thinking behind and sort of the motivating element behind what we wanted to produce today. So let's see. I think I have has something else here. So you saying that he completed last week's project, the roster. Yeah, I've seen what you've been doing. Thank you. That's great to see that that's something we've done here has sort of been picked up and applied to a specific real world case. Because I keep making, we make a lot of different types of production styles here, but we don't do them for real clients. I mean, we build a product and write software, but for what we do for the show, this is really things that I think about that I feel could be interesting or engaging or technically a better way to do things in a workflow. But when somebody takes that and then actually applies it in a real world scenario, that's very gratifying, because we recognize that not every script rewrite is sort of professional quality. It doesn't have all the error checking and other things that I'd need. It isn't as flexible. So, but they're demonstration scripts, and having that translation happen into real world is always great. So thank you for doing that. When I put the script together, again, I had bigger ambitions, like a lot of these when I start to do them. I have sort of a plan that's, where can I fit on the screen here? A plan that's that big, and then it usually ends up that big by show day. But, so there are a lot more things I wanted to do in this, but the core things that we wanted in this, where you had a sense of, introduction, voting, and then the tallies and crosstalk, that as long as I was able to capture that was the most important piece. But I think one of the other things that you can probably think of how you might be able to apply in your productions is inside of the discussion panel. That's the one with the guests on the side with the red or the green box and the text on the side. We're using those title elements as backgrounds. So think of that for yourself. Say you wanted to have guests set up where when a guest would speak, their background could light up blue and all the other guests would be gray or something like that. These are things that you can use that type of approach to do, where you can have a script that's reading the audio levels, and when a specific input's audio level goes up, you could turn around and say, change the title as a background. And, the backgrounds could be very, very flexible. So you could change the image behind somebody. So like when you change to a guest, you could sit there and go, in my title, now I'm going to, change the color to the colors of their company, and I'm changing a logo to their logo, and I'm, have a background that reflects the technology, like a doctor's office or a pharmacy or whatever. All of these things become possible. But when you start to think of titles not just as an overlay, but think of them as a layered element that you can manipulate, that opens up a lot of different ways to sort of build some of these productions. So hopefully you took some of that away from this, but I just wanted to point that out specifically because I think that's not something that is used as much as it could be, and it probably has a lot of applications in the way that people do things. All right, then. I know, as I said, we sort of started late, and I hate to be the one that sort of makes up for starting late by leaving early, but I think if we don't have any more questions or anything else that we want to dive into, we can probably give this show a wrap until next week. So give you just a couple more minutes here. And, I also, as we wrap this up, I wanted to thank everyone. We've had a lot of input on different show topics that we can cover. And so that's something we definitely take to heart. One of them, which I'm sort of going to give you a little bit of a tease that we're going to be doing in October, is a show on instant replay using esports. And the folks at X-Keys have actually sent us a replay controller that we can use for this show that I think, because we've had a few questions about how can you do this? How is it easy for a single person to do replay? So we've had a few of that. So what we're trying to do is combine this with, hardware, software scripting in a real world context to, give you something to start with for your own productions that could integrate replay on different levels. So just wanted to share that. I guess this is it then. So thank you very much, everybody, for sticking with us today, for hanging out for the post show, and know that we'll see you Friday. And until then, be well. Take care.